The blood-red Arizona sun cast Nathan Cole's shadow long across the dusty main street of Redemption as he stared down the barrel of his Colt .45 at the man who just called him a cheat. It was 1878, and in these parts, a man's reputation was worth killing for. "Draw or apologize," Nathan said, his voice as dry as the desert wind that kicked up dust around their boots. 28 years of hard living had taught him that words meant little compared to the cold certainty of steel. The trembling man dropped his gun and stammered an apology. Nathan holstered his weapon with practiced ease, the familiar weight of it against his hip more comforting than any human touch had been in years. "Wise choice," he muttered, turning back toward the saloon. The crowd that had gathered to witness potential bloodshed dispersed, disappointed but not surprised. Nathan Cole's reputation as the fastest gun in 3 counties meant most confrontations ended this way. What Nathan didn't notice was the woman watching from the newly established telegraph office across the street, her disapproving gaze following him as he pushed through the batwing doors. Delilah Garrison had arrived in Redemption just 3 days prior to take over the telegraph office after her uncle's passing. At 25, she'd left behind a comfortable life in Boston to claim her only remaining family member's business. The West wasn't what she had expected. It was wilder, dustier, and more lawless, but she was determined to make it her home. "Another day, another near shooting," commented Mrs. Abernathy, the elderly widow who ran the general store next door. "That's Nathan Cole. Lives by that gun of his." "Been that way since the war, they say." Delilah frowned, straightening her simple blue dress. "Is there no law here? Sheriff Jenkins tries his best, but men like Cole, well, they're a breed apart. Lost something in the war, found something else in violence." The old woman shrugged. "Good business for the undertaker, at least." Nathan slid onto a stool at the bar, placing 2 coins on the scarred wood. "Whiskey, Joe?" The barkeeper poured without comment, knowing better than to engage the gunslinger in conversation when his eyes held that distant look. Nathan drank, feeling the familiar burn, chasing away memories of screaming men at Shiloh, the faces of those he'd put in the ground since. "You're losing your touch, Cole," came a voice from the corner. Nathan didn't need to turn to know it was Silas Wayland, the local cattle baron's enforcer. "Time was you'd have put a hole in that card sharp without blinking." Nathan kept his gaze on his glass. "Man apologized. No need for killing." Silas laughed, the sound like stones rattling in a tin can, "Going soft, or just saving your bullets for when Tucker Reeves rides into town. Word is he's still mighty sore about you killing his brother." Nathan's fingers tensed around his glass. Tucker Reeves had sworn revenge after Nathan had shot his brother in self-defense 2 years prior. It was just one more name on the list of men who wanted him dead. "I'll be ready," Nathan said simply. The next morning, Delilah opened the telegraph office early. The clicking of the machine was a comforting reminder of civilization in this rough-edged town. When the bell above the door jingled, she looked up to see Nathan Cole himself, hat in hand, looking decidedly uncomfortable. "Morning, madam," he said stiffly. "Need to send a wire." Delilah nodded professionally, though her spine straightened involuntarily. This was the man she'd watched nearly kill someone yesterday over what appeared to be nothing more than wounded pride. "Of course, Mr. Cole, Nathan Cole, Mr. Cole. I'm Delilah Garrison. Please write your message here." She slid a form across the counter, noting the way he held the pencil awkwardly. His handwriting labored and rough as he slowly wrote out his message. When he handed it back, she read, "To Maria Cole stop will send money end of month stop all well stop Nathan, your wife." Delilah asked before she could stop herself. Nathan's expression darkened. "My mother, in San Francisco, consumption." Delilah's cheeks colored. "I'm sorry. That will be 25 cents. As Nathan counted out the coins, Delilah noticed the scars on his hands, the way his eyes constantly scanned the room, the door, the windows, a man who never truly relaxed. "New in town?" he asked unexpectedly. "Yes, my uncle owned this office. I inherited it when he passed last month." Nathan nodded. Samuel was a good man, honest. You knew him well, sent a lot of wires. He hesitated. You planning to stay? Redemption ain't exactly suitable for a lady alone. Delilah's chin lifted. I'm perfectly capable, Mr. Cole. And I believe every place becomes more suitable when good people decide to stay and improve it rather than simply complain about its shortcomings. Something flickered in Nathan's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or amusement. Well, Miss Garrison, that's a mighty fine sentiment. Hope it serves you well. He tipped his hat and left, the spurs on his boots jingling softly. Over the next 2 weeks, Delilah settled into the rhythm of redemption. She cleaned and organized the telegraph office, added curtains to the windows, and even placed a vase of desert wildflowers on the counter. Locals began to warm to her, especially when they realized she could be trusted with their messages and didn't gossip about their contents. Nathan found himself at the telegraph office more often than strictly necessary, sending wires to his mother that grew increasingly detailed. Delilah noticed the change but said nothing, simply offering a small smile whenever he entered. One afternoon, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, the door burst open, and Sheriff Jenkins stumbled in, bleeding from his shoulder. Miss Garrison, he gasped, need to send for the marshal in Tucson. Reeves' gangs hit the bank. Delilah helped the sheriff to a chair and quickly tapped out the emergency message. Gunfire erupted outside, and she moved to the window to see several men on horseback firing into buildings. In the middle of the street stood Nathan Cole, his gun drawn, facing 3 armed men. Get down, Sheriff Jenkins shouted, but Delilah remained frozen, watching as Nathan fired with deadly precision, dropping one man then another. The third man's bullet grazed Nathan's arm, but he didn't flinch, returning fire and hitting his target square in the chest. As the body fell, more riders appeared at the end of the street. That's Tucker Reeves himself, the sheriff muttered. Cole's in trouble now. Before Delilah could respond, Nathan ducked behind a water trough as bullets splintered the wood around him. She watched in horror as blood seeped through his shirt where he'd been grazed. We have to help him, she said, moving toward the door. Are you mad, woman? That's suicide. Jenkins grabbed her arm with his good hand. Delilah yanked free. I can't just watch him die. Making a split-second decision, she grabbed a white handkerchief from her pocket and stepped onto the porch of the telegraph office, waving it high. Cease fire. She called out in her most authoritative voice. The marshal from Tucson is already on his way with a dozen men. Tucker Reeves, a bear of a man with a wild beard, hesitated. You're bluffing, lady. Test me if you wish, Delilah replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I just sent the wire myself. They're less than an hour out. It was a lie, but she delivered it with unwavering conviction. Reeves cursed, looking at his remaining men. They'd already lost 3, and the prospect of facing a marshal's posse clearly didn't appeal to them. This ain't over, Cole. He shouted before wheeling his horse around. I'll find you when you ain't hiding behind a woman's skirts. The gang thundered out of town, leaving dust and groaning wounded in their wake. Delilah rushed to Nathan's side, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind his bleeding arm. That was the stupidest thing I've ever seen, he growled, though there was something like wonder in his eyes. He could have shot you dead. Words can be powerful weapons too, Mr. Cole, she replied, tying the makeshift bandage, sometimes more effective than bullets. Nathan stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. You're either the bravest or the most foolish woman I've ever met. Perhaps a bit of both, she admitted, helping him to his feet. Come along, Dr. Finch should look at that arm. As they walked toward the doctor's office, Nathan glanced sideways at her. Thank you. Not many would risk their neck for a gunslinger. I didn't do it for a gunslinger, Delilah replied softly. I did it for a man who sends money to his ailing mother and who didn't kill that cardsharp when he had every right to by the barbaric standards of this town. Nathan's steps faltered. You don't know anything about me. I know enough, she said simply. The doctor's office was crowded with those wounded in the shootout. Nathan insisted others be treated before him, and Delilah stayed by his side, her presence a quiet comfort he hadn't realized he needed. When Dr. Finch finally cleaned and stitched his wound, Nathan found himself telling Delilah about the war, about coming west afterward, unable to settle back into normal life. Words he'd never spoken aloud poured out of him as she listened without judgment. "The first time I killed a man after the war, it was self-defense," he said quietly. "But it gets easier, that's the terrible thing. It gets easier until it becomes who you are." "It's not who you are," Delilah insisted. "It's what circumstances have made you do." Nathan shook his head. "Pretty words, Miss Garrison, but out here, a man's word means nothing if he can't back it with steel." "Perhaps that's the problem," she suggested. "A man's word should stand on its own merit. That's how civilized societies function." "Redemption's hardly civilized." "It could be," she said, her eyes bright with conviction. "Every place can change if good people decide it should." In the days that followed, Nathan found himself stopping by the telegraph office even when he had no messages to send. He brought Delilah small gifts, a book from a passing peddler, fresh eggs from a farmer he'd helped. She accepted each with a genuine smile that did strange things to his chest. The town noticed. Mrs. Abernathy commented on how Nathan hadn't been involved in a single confrontation since the Reeves gang attack. Sheriff Jenkins noted that the gunslinger now spent evenings helping repair damage from the shootout rather than drinking at the saloon. One evening, as Nathan walked Delilah home from the office, she asked, "Have you ever thought of doing something besides your current profession?" Nathan smiled wryly. "Gunfighting isn't exactly a profession, Miss Garrison, it's more a condition." "You're an intelligent man, Mr. Cole. You could do anything you set your mind to." "Like what?" "I can barely write my own name, I've got no trade, no education." "You could learn," she suggested. "I could teach you. Proper writing, mathematics, you have a quick mind." Nathan stopped walking, studying her face in the fading light. "Why would you do that?" "Because I believe people deserve second chances," she said simply. "And because I enjoy your company." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Nathan felt something shift inside him, a wall beginning to crumble. "I'd like that," he said finally. Their lessons began the next day. After the telegraph office closed, Delilah would set out primers and papers, patiently guiding Nathan through his letters. His progress was remarkable once he applied himself, his natural intelligence finding purchase in the world of words and numbers. As weeks passed, rumors spread that Tucker Reeves was gathering men for another attack on Redemption. Sheriff Jenkins organized a town meeting at the church to discuss defenses. "We need every gun we can get," Jenkins announced to the assembled townsfolk. "Reeves has 20 men at least." All eyes turned to Nathan, who sat beside Delilah in the back pew. He stood slowly. "I've got a proposition," he said, his voice carrying through the church. "Instead of waiting for Reeves to attack, let's send a delegation to negotiate." Laughter and scoffs echoed through the building. "Negotiate with Tucker Reeves," Mayor Willoughby sneered. "The man's a rabid dog. Every man can be reasoned with," Nathan insisted, glancing at Delilah. "If we offer him something he wants more than revenge." "And what would that be?" Sheriff Jenkins asked skeptically. "Me," Nathan said simply. "I killed his brother. But instead of a shootout, I'm proposing a fair trial in Tucson. If I'm found guilty, I'll accept the punishment. If not, Reeves agrees to leave Redemption alone." Silence fell over the church as everyone processed his words. "You'd risk hanging." Mayor Willoughby asked incredulously. "It was self-defense," Nathan replied. "I'm willing to trust the law to recognize that, and if it doesn't," he shrugged. "Better one man hang than a dozen die in the street." Delilah stood beside him, her heart pounding. "I'll go as part of the delegation," she announced. "I can draft the agreement." After much debate, the town agreed to Nathan's plan. The next morning, Nathan, Delilah, Sheriff Jenkins, and Mayor Willoughby rode out to the Reeves camp 10 miles outside town. The negotiation was tense, with Tucker Reeves initially refusing to even listen. But Delilah's calm voice and carefully chosen words gradually wore down his resistance. She laid out the terms clearly, emphasizing that this agreement would give Reeves what he truly wanted: justice, not just revenge. "Your brother deserves his day in court," she told the outlaw. "Let the law decide if Mr. Cole acted justly." To everyone's surprise, Reeves eventually agreed, signing the document Delilah had prepared. Nathan would surrender himself to the Tucson marshal in 1 week's time for trial. In return, Reeves and his men would permanently leave redemption territory, regardless of the trial's outcome. As they rode back to town, Nathan and Delilah fell back from the others. "Why did you really suggest this?" she asked quietly. "You could have run, disappeared before Reeves attacked." Nathan's eyes met hers. "Because you were right about words having power, about a man being more than his gun." He hesitated. "And because I couldn't bear the thought of you being caught in the crossfire when Reeves came." Delilah's breath caught. "Nathan." "I've grown mighty fond of our lessons, Miss Garrison," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Mighty fond of the teacher, too." The week before Nathan's departure passed too quickly. Every evening they sat together in the telegraph office, continuing his education with an urgency neither acknowledged. On their final night, Delilah closed her primer with trembling hands. "I have something for you," she said, reaching into her desk. She withdrew a leather-bound journal. "For your thoughts during the trial." Nathan took it reverently, thumbing through the blank pages. "I'll fill every page," he promised. "And when I return, if you return," she whispered. "When?" he insisted, reaching for her hand. "Delilah, I've lived my whole life believing nothing mattered beyond surviving each day. You've shown me there's more, given me something to come back for." Their fingers intertwined, and Delilah felt tears welling in her eyes. "Be careful with your words, Mr. Cole. I might hold you to them." "I'm counting on it," he murmured, leaning forward to press his lips gently to hers. The next morning, Nathan rode out with Marshal Patterson, who had arrived to escort him to Tucson. Delilah stood on the telegraph office porch, watching until they disappeared from sight. The 2 weeks of Nathan's absence were the longest of Delilah's life. Each day, she sent telegrams to the courthouse in Tucson, requesting updates. The replies were frustratingly brief: "Trial proceeding." "Witness testimony continues." "Jury deliberating." On the 15th day, the telegraph machine clicked to life with a message that made her heart stop. "Cole cleared of all charges. Stop leaving Tucson tomorrow. Stop. He was coming home." She pressed the paper to her chest, relief washing through her like a flash flood after drought. 2 days later, she was sorting mail when the door opened. Nathan stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking tired but whole. Before he could speak, Delilah had crossed the room and thrown herself into his arms. "You're back," she breathed against his chest. "I promised," he replied, holding her tightly. "And I've learned the value of keeping my word." That evening they walked along the creek outside town, hands clasped between them. Nathan told her about the trial, how Tucker Reeves had actually testified that his brother had drawn first, honoring their agreement despite his personal feelings. "Reeves came to me after the verdict," Nathan said. "Told me he respected a man who'd face a hanging rather than hide behind a gun. Said it took more courage than any shootout." "He was right," Delilah replied softly. Nathan stopped walking, turning to face her in the golden sunset light. "I've been thinking about what comes next for us, for me." "And what have you decided?" "Sheriff Jenkins offered me a deputy position," he said. "Said redemption could use a man who knows trouble but chooses words first." He smiled slightly. "I told him I'd consider it if a certain telegraph operator approved." Delilah reached up to touch his cheek. "And what else?" Nathan took her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "I want to court you properly, Delilah Garrison. No more living by the gun. I want to build something that lasts, something worthy of the faith you've shown in me." "Yes," she whispered, rising on her toes to kiss him. "To all of it." 3 months later, Nathan stood nervously in the church, watching as Delilah walked toward him in a simple white dress, wildflowers in her hair. Sheriff Jenkins stood beside him as best man, and Mrs. Abernathy sniffled loudly in the front pew. As they exchanged vows, Nathan's promise rang clear and true. "I pledge to you my life and my word, Delilah. From this day forward, I'll live by the strength of my promises, not by the speed of my draw." The years that followed brought changes to both Nathan and Redemption. The town grew, attracting families and businesses. Nathan proved himself an excellent deputy, eventually becoming sheriff when Jenkins retired. His reputation for fairness and level-headed negotiation spread throughout the territory, and he was often called to mediate disputes that once would have ended in bloodshed. Delilah continued running the telegraph office while starting a small school in the back room. Their first child, a daughter named Hope, was born a year after their wedding, followed by a son, Samuel, named after Delilah's uncle. 5 years to the day after they met, Nathan surprised Delilah by leading her to a plot of land overlooking the town. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing to the foundation already laid. "Nathan, is this?" "Our home," he confirmed, pulling building plans from his coat. "Designed it myself. Took some doing to learn the mathematics of it, but I had a good teacher." Tears filled Delilah's eyes as she examined the detailed drawings, evidence of how far he had come. "It's beautiful." "I wanted to give you something permanent," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Something built by these hands that once knew only how to destroy." "You've already given me everything," she whispered, leaning back against his chest as they looked out over the growing town. "You kept your word." "Always will," he promised. On their 10th anniversary, they hosted a dinner at their hillside home for the entire town. As twilight fell, Nathan stood and raised his glass. 10 years ago, I was a man who believed only in the certainty of death and the reliability of my Colt," he said, his eyes finding Delilah's across the table. "Then a stubborn telegraph operator showed me that words could be more powerful than bullets, that promises could build rather than destroy." He reached for Delilah's hand. "To my wife, who taught a gunslinger to live by his word instead of his gun. And to Redemption, a town that lives up to its name." Later that night, as they stood on their porch watching the stars, Delilah leaned against her husband. "Did you ever imagine this life back when you were staring down that card sharp on the day I arrived?" Nathan chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "Not in my wildest dreams. I figured my story would end in Boot Hill before I turned 30. And now," he pulled her closer, dropping a kiss on her temple, "now I know my story was just beginning. The real adventure started the day you waved that white handkerchief and faced down Tucker Reeves with nothing but your wits and your words." "We make quite the pair," she murmured. "The gunslinger and the wordsmith," he agreed. "Turns out your weapons were stronger." As the years passed, their children grew and Redemption prospered. The railroad came through, bringing new opportunities and connecting the once isolated town to the wider world. Nathan served as sheriff for 20 years before retiring to focus on the ranch they'd built together. Their legacy lived on in the town's reputation for fair dealing and peaceful resolution. In the school Delilah had established that grew into Redemption's first proper academy, and in their children who carried forward the lesson that had transformed a gunslinger's life, that a person's word, kept faithfully, held more power than any weapon. And when visitors asked about the town's unusual peacefulness in a territory still known for its wildness, old-timers would smile and tell the story of Nathan Cole, the man who had lived by his gun, until the woman who became his wife taught him to live by his word instead.